residents and friends. Tonight, you will be making some history in Westerwood. It's the first time that I know of we've had two outstanding events in one evening. So the first event, of course, will be our jazz concert, and then afterwards we're going to go right into honoring the outstanding residents of the year and outstanding deaf person. And when the concert's over, you stay seated because we're going to start that right here, do the introductions and all that, and then we'll go to the dining room for above average refreshments. I mean, they're really going to be good. Anyway, this is, I say it's Tony's encore performance, but I've lost track how many times he's come because we always wanted to come back. Some of you may not know that Tony accompanied our village singers for 2 years, and we like the way you do music. Thank you. So Tony, introduce your folks, whatever you want to do.
Sounds good. I think we'll play a song first, and then I'll introduce the band for you. So, how's everybody doing out there, Westerwood? All right. We're going to start with kind of the Tony Hagood Quartet classic, There Will Never Be Another You. Thank you guys so much. That's Dr. Michael Cox on the saxophone. Reggie Jackson on the drum. George Delancey on the bass. And of course, my name is Tony Hagood. So that was a really fun arrangement, and I was just talking with the guys, because this is the trio that's going to be playing with me, mostly the trio that's going to be playing with me October 2nd, for the dedication of a new concert grand piano at the Lincoln Theater. So, yeah. So if you guys are interested in that, go online at jag.org and look for tickets for Handful of Keys, because it's not just me and my trio, it's also Bobby Floyd and his trio, and Dave Powers and his trio, and Robert Mason and his trio, so it's going to be a fun evening. Make sure to grab your tickets for that. That's one of a couple of plugs that I'll do, so shameless plugs. But we'd like to play a Victor Young tune for you guys up next. This is called Beautiful Love. Thank you guys so much. Beautiful Love. Anybody know that tune? One person? I see some pointing going on. All right, Beautiful Love. Well, I think we're going to play one that you guys will know. And here comes my second plug. September 28th is the kickoff to our season at the Columbus Museum of Art. We've got 4 concerts that we do there, 4 jazz concerts, and the first one's called Mood Indigo, celebrating 100 years of Duke Ellington. September 28th, 2 p.m., Columbus Museum of Art, nice afternoon concert. And it's going to be with the Nonette, so there'll be 9 people on stage, including a singer, doing some really great arrangements. So we hope to see you there. And if you're interested in the series in general, you can find these postcards kind of on some tables around here. There's no good central place to put one. But grab one on your way out and just throw it up on your fridge. It's got all the information on the back and the dates of the 4 concerts that we do. Our December one usually sells out, and we've just had a lot of fun over the last 4 or 5 years or so doing this series. So we hope to see you there for our first concert of the season. And since I was talking about that, we're going to play this originally attributed to Duke Ellington composition, but later it was found out that Billy Strayhorn was the composer of this piece. From what I understand, Duke and Billy kind of worked, side by side. So sometimes Duke will get a little tired of writing some composition and just hand it off to Billy. Billy might work on the next section and hand it back to Duke, and those types of things. So it's kind of hard to tell which part was Duke, which part was Billy, which composition was all Duke, which was all Billy. So this next one was attributed to Billy. It's called Take the A Train. We're going to play it in a little bit of a different style for you guys.
Thank you.
tempo tune.
That wasn't the slow train.
That's the fast train. Take that fast A train. That's right. So we hope to see you September 28th for that season premiere, 2 p.m. at the Columbus Museum of Art. Imagine that with 9 people on stage. It's going to be great. But it feels like fall outside, doesn't it? Jim got in touch with me and said, "Hey Tony, it's going to be too cold out. I'm going to be inside today." I said, "Too cold? 70 degrees, that's perfect." But I understand it's a little different, especially when the sun starts going down. So I'm glad we're in this, nice space that you guys have, Friendship Hall, for this great concert. But since it is kind of getting cooler out there, I thought it'd be a good time for us to play some autumn-themed songs. And we're going to start with Autumn Leaves, written by Joseph Cosman, lyrics by Johnny Mercer. called Leaves. Then there's this other tune. I first heard this tune, learned about this tune when I heard Jeff Hamilton Trio play it. This is a really great standard, and then later I listened to a bunch of other recordings. It's a lot of fun. So we're going to play another autumn theme tune. This is called Lullaby of the Leaves. Carlos and Joe Beam. And the joke always is there's a lot more than one note. We're going to do two more for you. One quick one and one a little bit longer. This is an arrangement that I came up with in the practice room when I set my backing track on the wrong setting. You guys have had that problem before, right?
All the time. Yeah.
All the time.
It just happened just then.
Right. So listen real closely, and those of you that are musically inclined, see if you can tell me what time signature this is in. Oh.
Did they know?
They will once I start playing.
Made Famous by Louis Armstrong. I think it's a really good indicator of the world. You know, there may be babies crying, there may be stuff happening, but it's still a wonderful world. So this is a little arrangement that I put together over the years, and I like to close my concerts with it. guys so much. Give it up one more time for Reggie Jackson on the drums. George Delancey on the bass. Michael Cox. Once again, I'm Tony Hagood. Make sure to grab a flyer for our September 28th show, and we hope to see you October 2nd as well. Good to turn it over to Jim. Thank you so much for having us, Jim.
All right. Thank you so much, Tony. Thank you so much. I have two announcements. You're gonna like these.